Hello and welcome to Patching Backup Strategies and Lessons from the CrowdStrike Outage. Things to know. Livestorm begins all of our webinars with your sound on mute. If you can't hear us, click on the screen to turn on the sound. Your microphone will remain muted, but please use the chat to talk to us. And while you're there, let us know where you're dialing in from today. If the alerts are too much, you can mute them by clicking on the bell on the right. You will automatically get a recording, but if you would like the presentation slides, please email me at virginia@criticalinsight.com. Let me introduce today's speakers. Mike Hamilton is the co-founder and CISO of Critical Insight. He's the former CISO for the city of Seattle. Frequently quoted in major media, Mike is an in-demand speaker and educator. Fred Langston is the co-founder and chief product officer for Critical Insight. He's a pioneer in InfoSec with over 2 decades of experience and was an author of the HIPAA security rule. He is also an in-demand speaker. And Brad Swanson is a deputy CISO and a principal consultant of Critical Insight, where he provides virtual CISO and cybersecurity services to clients across various industries. With expertise in network security, compliance, and IT management, he helps organizations achieve their security and compliance goals. With that, I'll hand it over to you, Mike.
Okay. Hi, everybody. So, a couple of things to talk about here that look like they may be a little disjoint, but they are definitely connected. And so we thought with what happened with CrowdStrike and Microsoft and the carnage that ensued that we would talk about this and then try to drive some messaging about backup strategies, immutable backups, recovery planning, response, things like that, and how to involve your vendors and things like that, because that's what this was. So here's the meme that came out the day that CrowdStrike failed. And so here's this first day at CrowdStrike, pushed a little update and taken the afternoon off. All right, well, that's a joke slash trope that's been around for a long time. We test in production, frankly. But here's the real effect from that. And if you got caught up in the travel difficulties, first of all, condolences. But there were some airlines that had more of a dependence, being CrowdStrike customers, than others. And so Delta Airlines really got crushed, and people really, really had a bad time traveling that day. So again, if you got caught up in that, apologies. We're not making fun of it. This was a bad day, a bad few days for a lot of people. It's being called the largest IT outage in history. I don't know if that's really true, but it was certainly outsized for a simple mistake. We've seen other things that were intentional, and we'll talk about a few of those as comparisons. But again, this really had an impact on Delta Airlines, I think, more than any other airline. And CrowdStrike, up and to the right in the Gartner quadrant, this is a great tool. It is very effective. It is deployed everywhere. We monitor CrowdStrike and manage things like quarantining assets when they're acting up. But this was all just caused by an update. And the criticality of something that is this broadly deployed is something that I think we need to learn some lessons from. In the health sector, they were talking about the United Healthcare outage, Change Healthcare that was handling, 80% of the billing and insurance reimbursement for the healthcare industry, flattened it for weeks. It was awful. So we need to learn some lessons here. Yes, the impacts were global. CrowdStrike is a global company. It has millions of endpoints under its EDR agent. And so healthcare, again, really got hit hard. Air travel got hit hard. Government got hit hard. And I think government, as it does, is now being very introspective. How could we have allowed this to happen? This is a single point of failure. In my mind, this is why monopolies are broken up, because they become not only an impediment to competition, but these single points of failure. I would say probably 99% of the people on this presentation right now are Microsoft customers. And so a problem with Microsoft means, boop, all of us are gone. Virginia is smug in her Macness, which is probably not a bad strategy. When I am home or in my music studio, I am smug in my Linuxness. So, but when they started tallying up the losses from the Fortune corporations, we're talking about more than $5 billion. And so there may be another shoe to drop for CrowdStrike. As we all know, as we've seen over and over, when there is a third-party caused disruption, whether or not that's cyber attack through a supply chain, and especially if there are records disclosed, which there were not in this, but it's followed by a class action suit. So if that much money was lost by Fortune corporations, they're going to be looking for a pound of flesh. And I do think that there is another shoe to drop. So Microsoft's saying 8.5 million of their devices were impacted, and they were helpful in publishing a recovery tool that took, you guys keep me honest here, 15 reboots, something like that. Had a very complex path to get you back working again. So this is what happened. It was massive. There are knock-on effects from things like this that can last a long time. And so here is a publication, a periodical that is all about supply chain. And they were talking about disruptions to supply chain that happened here, right? So major closures and delays at ports in air freight, obviously. Air freight severely affected. So the point here is, while this is really irritating and we couldn't work until we figured out how to get things fixed, and CrowdStrike pushed the fix, and in order to get the fix in there, it took a lot of reboots and people were working round the clock to get this done. There can be effects that linger on. So when supply chains are disrupted, and we've all seen this recently, it can have an impact on inflation and interest rates, and therefore elections, right? So something like this, that is an accident, that's that far reaching, and every country around the world just saw this happen. Okay, it becomes easy to identify that component of our technology infrastructure, that one thing. If we could mess up that one thing, it has these far-reaching effects that can linger for quite a while. Now, I'd say that they put things back together very quickly, right? All of the working around the clock and all of the efforts that were gone into Microsoft producing its own tool to try and get everybody back together, those were pretty effective. So I don't think these effects are going to linger for a while, but just note that the possibility is there of, especially as we're going through an election, throwing all of this stuff into question, and who are we going to point fingers at? And oh my God, inflation is starting to peak again, and we got to blame somebody. All right, so how did CrowdStrike perform their updates? And this is information I got from an interview that I had with a competitor of CrowdStrike that I won't name, who knows people inside CrowdStrike, and saying this is how they do it. There's millions of endpoints out there, and they're all reporting the things they've seen and stopped. And because there are behavioral analytics involved, it's not just things that they found a signature for, right? Didn't see the signature of the Emotet Trojan, but this user or this asset did something so weird, we throw off an alert. And sometimes those alerts are, we saw a process injected into another running process. We saw attempts to disable the EDR, things like that. So they aggregate all of these things coming off this endpoints, a lot of which are seeing very new things, in some cases even 0 days. And then apparently about 12 times a day, their developers would push out updates from ingesting all of that telemetry and finding out how to do a detection signature, so that if it happens again somewhere else, you get the benefit of something that happened on the other side of the world. Great stuff. 12 times a day, approximately. Now, CrowdStrike has hooks into the kernel. So if it goes bad, it's going to affect the entire operating system. And the way that they had been doing it was when they push an update, the update goes out to all of their customers simultaneously. Now they've rethought that. Now, this is what I'm told, is they're doing this piecewise by sending it out to their lower end clients, right? Their down market clients. Because if there's a problem there, the impact isn't going to be so wide and far reaching, and certainly not as expensive. Then they'll push to the Fortune corporations, the Lockheeds, the et ceteras, right? So if there are no issues. So they've modified their process here. And when you look at what their process was, it looks like it's still kind of in the, move fast, break things startup mode. And this is reflected from some statements by some CrowdStrike engineers, right? So here they say rush deadlines, excessive workloads, right? All that leads to making mistakes. They apparently had complained about this for a while. And I think that one thing that I heard along the way, and I don't know that this stuck, was that one of the things that CrowdStrike said was, well, the tool that we use to do the automated testing of our updates didn't discover this particular bug, so it's the tool's fault. I don't know if any of that's true. Like I said, that was a flash in the pan statement. I don't know if that's going to be back or not, but that is what they said. So, but here are the employees going, we are really getting, rushed to get this stuff out, and that creates the potential for mistakes. So what can we learn from this? All right, again, we are depending on products and services, just like the healthcare sector relied on Change Healthcare very broadly, right? And if we get something like this compromised, it results in a global scale failure, right? We have built this technology and this infrastructure, and there have been companies that have ascended to the top of the provider food chain, and we've all bought into the great ones, and that creates this problem where if something goes bad, it affects all of us, all right? And again, what if this had happened during the hurricane? Emergency management is impacted. Cannot have emergency management non-functional when you're trying to save people's lives. So we got off easy on this. If it had been a few weeks later, we'd be having a different discussion about this. All right, so compare what happened to CrowdStrike with some of the things that were done maliciously, right? So not Petya, that was compromised, an accounting software package produced in Ukraine, jumped the fence, all of a sudden it's all over the world. Tyler Technologies, they were penetrated. Somebody inside Tyler provides a lot of products to local government. Munis, for example, which is an ERP system for local government. They got penetrated. Whoever was inside was surveilling their remote access communications to all these local jurisdictions. They grabbed all the passwords, and all of a sudden they were in. Kaseya, that was a supply chain ransomware attack and affected 1,500 companies. Remember SolarWinds? Chinese backdoored the product. The update went out to everybody. All of a sudden, everybody's got a little Chinese problem. And then we talked about United Change in healthcare. So again, we can compare what happened to CrowdStrike with what's happened maliciously. And I think the lesson being learned from other countries that are antithetical to our way of life in the United States are there are these pieces here that if we attack them, we are going to have an outsized impact on the economy and the stability of the United States. Right? And no better example of this than healthcare. I will point out that the deal that CrowdStrike did with the federal government has exacerbated the problem because they made it real easy for local governments to get CrowdStrike on the cheap. And so that's what they all have. So lots and lots and lots of impact to local government. That's your water purification, your flushing toilet, right? That's emergency management. That's bad. Still, this is not the best reason to reject a product. We get products based on functionality, whether or not it can integrate into our environment, price, things like that. Remember, China right now is getting off the Microsoft operating system for this reason. They do not want to be part of a global thing like this, and they don't want Microsoft in the United States knowing how to attack Microsoft products. That just means we're going to attack, whatever they come up with. Patch testing, we're going to talk about that. Should we be notified of upgrades when a vendor is going to push an update like that? Should we know? And frankly, a question that came up as we were doing the research for this is the testing that they do model-based or is it empirical? Is it statistical testing? We don't think there's going to be a failure rate that is outlandish. Or is it we have tested this with different operating systems, different versions, and it's good to go? We don't know. So with that, I am going to turn this over to Fred, who's going to talk about patching now that we're all reminded of the debacle that happened a few weeks ago.
Yeah, we're really going to lean into the situation that came up because of CrowdStrike, but also we live with every day when we think about Microsoft products. We think about our browsers. We think about all sorts of things that are actually auto-updating. And this is a little bit of a sea change that happened from about 10 years ago. I spent a lot of time at Semantic. Their whole approach, which required them to push out updates almost as frequently, was to allow you to manage the systems. You manage when those updates happen. You were doing your own testing. We made a change here, right? Up until recently, fully automated patching with no user intervention was frowned upon. And frankly, in a lot of cases, up until recently, not even allowed. So we've really kind of had a sea change. Is this good? Probably, because systems are getting patched that weren't getting patched before. But is the process being run in the most effective and risk-free manner? Probably not, because we're kind of shifting some of the risk to one side of the equation from the other side when we do this. So mature organizations, patches are normally tested prior to deployment. I mean, that is kind of patching 101, right? We also know that if you're using automated patching, it's not following change control. As Mike said, are they even telling you that they're going to push this, or what their schedule is, or what the content is? Pushing out a set of signature updates is probably almost no risk. Pushing out a software update to the EDR product itself is probably significantly higher risk. So we don't know what's happening, can't follow change control, don't allow you to manage when it's going to happen, right? It's, hey, we woke up this morning and everything broke. And another thing is starting to show up here, and that is, what does it mean to recover an almost entirely remote workforce, right? We've spent so many years thinking, well, let's rebuild from backup. Everybody will show up at the office with their laptops. Well, no, not anymore, right? And as we'll see, this is one of the huge challenges that kind of made this kind of a perfect storm when we talk about how CrowdStrike kind of got us here. So there's also this other concept here, and this shows how I'm a huge proponent of, if there's a critical vulnerability found on an edge device exposed to the internet, that is an incident. It just hasn't fully gone through its attack cycle yet, but it will happen, and it will happen within a very predictable short period of time, and you need to go out and do something about that. Question becomes, well, shouldn't we have automated patching then? So that particular system is automatically patched the second it sees there's a 0-day out there. And maybe there's something to be said for that, but really it takes a very mature organization to have redundant infrastructure, and having a patch rolling out to one side and not the other to see that it breaks and it becomes probably out of the reach of all but maybe enterprise style organizations. So that's a huge challenge to understand. We got to get these vulnerabilities fixed as soon as possible, because they're going to get attacked. But hey, we can't really turn on automated patching because it may break it, may do all sorts of other things that we don't yet understand. Now, the big question, are your product vendors doing these things? I mean, if we're trying to do all these things, what about your product vendors? Worse yet, how do you actually verify patching procedures, right? So this is a real challenge. Let's kind of talk about how we kind of got here a little bit. This is what automated patching has to do with it. CrowdStrike's perfect storm, right? As Mike said, they're using an older testing method that they've now changed. It had a minor code error in one file. That's at least what the reports say. It's locally installed, but it's being managed remotely, right? So it of course removes the need for the user to trigger any of this, but it also means somebody outside your organization is making a core IT change on your behalf, but unbeknownst to you, right? The second this was pushed, because it was pushed to all endpoints, it was a global outage, right? As soon as people powered up their machines or those patches were able to run, it took down those systems, blue screen of death. And one of the real challenges here is most people have things like BitLocker turned on. If you have BitLocker turned on, this becomes an even more exacerbated problem, because now you have to have BitLocker encryption keys. You need to be able to go in and have somebody physically be there with the machine. And if you go back and you think about what I talked about here, right here, on forces the need for developed user-level processes, think about what it means to help a user go through a very complex process like the recovery of this, helping them get a BitLocker. You probably are like, is that even possible? Can we write a bulletproof procedure? And that to even make it more difficult, if you know anything about laptops, you know that every model, it seems like, has a different key combination to boot into the BIOS or the UBI interface, so you can actually get in and do some of the things you need to do. So it becomes very challenging, and then you're stuck with, how do I get 500 or 5,000 remote worker laptops patched? That is a Herculean effort. So that was the perfect storm that they lived through. What about auto update in Windows, right? We're letting Windows patch things every day. So it becomes a risk-based decision. Losing 25 systems in one office, one IT person can probably spend the rest of the day, go around and bring those systems back. If those 25 systems are spread all over the globe, it becomes a different equation. So you have to kind of make a decision on where to apply update. I mean, frankly, I would like to see it applied everywhere it can be, but you have to take into account, if these machines break, what do I do? What about things that are high business value or critical systems like domain controllers? Do we ever want anything auto updated by Windows, by CrowdStrike, by anybody on a system like that? Probably not. And auto update also is not going to, if local auto update on Windows doesn't see everything, right? If you're using maybe Defender for Endpoint, using its inventory and its ability to identify vulnerable software packages, okay, you're using it to its fullest. Definitely something. If you haven't used Winget yet, folks, great way to understand what else is on that machine. That's an application that may need to be patched, and actually quickly patching it. So the vulnerability management process cycle, actually this should be the patch management cycle. I put that wrong. Scan and track means go out and find out who's got patches, what kind of vulnerabilities, are there workarounds. Got to monitor what the vendors are telling in every update that comes out. We need to find out, are we patching the right machine? So put them into context, risk-based, and prioritize thusly. Test those patches before they go out, and then use a risk-based phased rollout, as we hear hopefully CrowdStrike is doing today. Now rolling out to smaller customers, testing, making sure things don't break, then expanding that out to a larger customer base. So the damages, or at least the blast radius, is contained. Talk a little bit again about backup and recovery, because again, now the world comes back to, how do we recover from something like this? And the same thing happens when we're talking about ransom. Now that, ransomware is going to target, find, and encrypt data everywhere. So recovering from backup is not just recovering from a drive. It may be recovering a database, which is a very, very different thing. Anything that has a drive letter, ransomware can find now and encrypt. So things like OneDrive, yeah, it has a drive letter. Google Drive, yeah, it's got a drive letter. So all of those can easily be pulled into a ransomware. So I like to say to people, how about for your next tabletop, you and your cloud backup provider were using CrowdStrike. And now not only are your backups bricked, because they're bricked, but so are your systems at the same time. So there are some fun permutations you can put together when you're doing your next tabletop. Try to figure those out. So what are some of the things to do? Again, we're talking about kind of the new best practices. Cloud backup systems, you want to make sure that you're storing your encryption keys not on a laptop or a system on your network that the bad guys, when they hack in and have DA, can find. It needs to be off system. It needs to be in a potentially what they call a trusted platform module, a TPM, or in a safe on a piece of paper, so nobody else can get to those things. Use things like multi-file versioning. Okay, this is a fantastic feature in OneDrive that can help you go back up to 30 days and figure out, okay, I can roll back at least this far because I know I have good data here. Again, this is useful if you're telling your users they need to do some restoration on their own. They can actually go get critical data they need immediately if they need you to keep their jobs moving. Try not to utilize a drive letter if you can. And in particular, backup systems should have what they call immutable backups in this day and age. That is something that is, frankly, I think become one of the most important things you can do. We've always used the 3-to-1 backup rule, but in some senses, is it still good enough? People are questioning this, right? It needs to be more than just one original copy and 2 other copies, not just 2 different kinds of media, not just one on-site and off-site. Although if this is done at a very high level, it is probably still very good. The problem is the cost and complexity of maintaining something really robust. A fantastically interesting article came out about Iron Mountain, and Iron Mountain tattled on themselves and said, we looked at a bunch of old hard disks. A lot of these came in still in their original wrapper, been used once for backup, and those brand new used once hard drives don't work. They have a significant failure rate. Now this talks about stuff back to the 90s, but they've actually tested drives all across different ages and find out they fail at an incredibly rapid rate. It is not forever storage like all of us thought it was when we're sending it out to the caves of Iron Mountain. So consider that if it's something long-term storage, think about what that means to recover that data at some point. So improving on it, maybe save some money, right? You want to strike a balance. Identify critical systems. Maybe they get really high-level backup. They get, 3-2-1. They get immutable backups. And things that are not as important, maybe they get local backup with OneDrive and things that are a little bit less robust and maybe a little bit not as quite as strong. But you can balance these things out, but you at least need to make sure your critical systems can be rapidly recovered, right? The things that are starting to happen, there's some new technologies called continuous data protection. It's constantly checking data, fixing data. It's kind of cutting edge, but the one I like is immutable backup. So what makes something immutable? Well, it's a copy that can't be altered or deleted for a set period of time, even by the administrator. In other words, once it's put in there, nothing except probably a big magnet can change that data in there and make it go away, right? So that way your data is unalterable by a bad guy, a good guy, or anybody else, right? It helps you also meet data protection and preservation requirements and data integrity. The real good thing, and the thing we always want to make sure people understand, is this is a fantastic way to recover. Okay, recovering from a ransomware key is absolutely the slowest, most inefficient, most error-prone method to recover. So you want to get out from at least paying a ransom because your data has been extorted. Well, now you can just say, you know what? That data that was stolen, let's look on the right-hand side of this slide. It was just the sales data, okay? You know what? You can threaten us all or want that you're going to sell our data line. We don't care. Yeah, we don't like it. Yeah, it's ugly, but you know what? It's sales data. We don't care. We can recover faster than you can by giving us that key, right? So really you start tilting finally there's a way to tilt the scale away from the bad guys, right? Now, certainly if they steal, PII or critical data, well, at least the only thing you're still negotiating for is the value of that data. You're not still negotiating on, I need to get back and operational. So you can still get operational. So there's no good reason to not have a really strong backup and recovery process to recover from these things. So other things to remember: recover systems in the right order. Make sure you exercise these teams all the time on different types of recovery. A laptop, a domain controller, a database, different process, right? Recovering from full blowdown and data rebuild, pulling from images and recovering from that. Each one of those are different. You need to practice all of those, right? And if you do ever have to go back to pencil and paper, I advise everybody practice that at least once, because the one time you don't want to learn how to go back to pencil and paper is when the house is on fire, right? Okay, Brad.
Awesome. Thanks, Fred. First of all, is everybody able to hear me okay? I've been having some mic issues today. Perfect. Thanks, Virginia. So we're going to talk a little bit now about incident response and third-party risk. We've been focusing a lot on CrowdStrike today during the call. And so a lot of the things that apply to what happened on CrowdStrike Friday will also apply to your other third-party vendors. It happened to CrowdStrike this time, but it could happen to another vendor next time. So we're going to be kind of broad here, but just keep in mind that we are kind of referring to what happened with CrowdStrike and the possibility of that taking place again. So your third parties do come with risk. It's just the nature of the beast. It's something that we have to accept. We can't just say we're not going to do business with third parties. But by giving them access to your network, for example, you're trusting who they trust. You're also trusting what libraries they use. If they're developing a product and they use libraries off GitHub that may have been compromised, now you're using that compromised library, and you might not even realize that library is part of their product. You might not have good communication set up. This is something you should always lay out, like in a BAA, if you're a healthcare facility, in any kind of a contract or an MSA, is what happens if you, as the third-party vendor, CrowdStrike or whoever, what happens if you have an issue or an incident or release a bad patch or whatever? How are you going to notify us? How soon are you going to notify us? You really need to have these things laid out. I worked for a company prior to my life here with the CI family, and we had a third-party vendor that leaked all of our AWS root keys. Never told us, never told anybody whose keys were leaked. We didn't find out until 3 years after it happened, when we wound up with malicious actors on our network. Had we had something in the contract with that third party, they would have been obligated to notify us. We would have had something to fall back on. So it's important that you have that built in. Some third parties like CrowdStrike, they tie into your OS. So if they release a bad patch, not only does it mess up their product, it can mess up your operating system as well, which is what we saw on CrowdStrike Friday. All these machines that are blue screening. And so it's taking down the entire system rather than just one application that you may use. And the fixes can be a pain in the neck, as Mike was saying earlier. 15 reboots to get a system back online, or having to walk around and touch each machine to boot it into safe mode, to remove the update, to reboot it. Again, if you're at 25 systems in a single office, yeah, a day. But if you are a large organization, I once worked for a company. We had 40,000 users across like 200 countries. So, you can't just walk from machine to machine at that point. So very important to kind of understand what these risks are and to identify those. You should do this as part of like a business impact analysis. If you do see a vulnerability out there, especially a critical vulnerability, treat it as an incident. It's really good practice to run through your incident response program to make sure that you and your team are staying familiar with it. A lot of orgs will not say, okay, vulnerability really, they won't assign an incident to a vuln. But by doing that for criticals, it really kind of makes a lot of sense, because you're going through your plan, you're ensuring that all the boxes are checked, all the steps are taken that you need to get things back to where they need to be. Some places that we've worked with have even come up with run books specific to a critical vulnerability. And a run book is just basically a list of steps for your IR plan of, hey, if this happens, this is how we address this. A vulnerability you would treat differently than a ransomware infection, for example. Vulnerability reporting should be in place between you and your third parties. If you have a vulnerability that's going to affect your third party, you'll let them know. If they have a vulnerability that's going to affect you, they should be letting you know. Again, this should be laid out in contracts. There should be something in there, and it should specify how soon they have to notify you. They're always going to play games at the time. I guarantee it. I used to be the manager of incident response and threat intelligence for another organization, and we would play that game. We're going to stretch it out. When we really don't know that we had a breach, or we're going to drag that out, make sure there's a time frame. Within 48 to 72 hours, they need to notify you. And you can even put in language where if you suspect a breach, notify us, not if you've confirmed it, because again, they'll play that timing game. And then make sure that your contract language has some teeth. Make sure that there is some sort of compensation for you if there is an outage suffered. They might kick it back. Their lawyers might redline it, but it never hurts to ask for those kind of concessions when needed. And then also, by declaring an incident for a critical vuln, we see this at a lot of organizations. They just don't have the people power to address the vulnerabilities right when they come out. By declaring an incident, now you've kind of raised the bar on that vulnerability, and it might help to free up some individuals who may be able to get that vulnerability resolved a little bit quicker without having to wait until I get some free time to go address it. Communication. Communications are very critical when it comes to incident response stuff. You want to make sure that you're communicating with your internal and external stakeholders. You can say, hey, we have a third party that's having an issue. We'll let you know. Our ETA to come back online is this if we know it. If you don't know it, just say, we don't have that information right now, but as soon as we do, we'll communicate it. Make sure that you have a cadence for these comms and make sure that you stick to it. Don't ever miss it. Even if you don't have an update and you're supposed to give an update at 6 p.m., send out that message, that blog post, that email, whatever it is, saying, this is our regular cadence. We don't have anything to report. This is the situation as of right now. This is where we're hoping to go with it, but never, ever miss anything, especially for lack of information. And then be transparent and honest. Don't make things up. Don't use conjecture or speculation. Just say what you know that's been approved to say. And just remember, you can always share more, but it's really hard to pull information back, especially if you've shared misinformation or you weren't transparent or honest about a statement that you made. This is one of the big issues that we've seen with the CrowdStrike issue is that people's machines started to blue screen left and right, and nobody really knew what was going on. We just got a CrowdStrike patch. So a lot of people were finding the solutions through, I don't want to say third parties because we're talking about third parties, but they'd go to Reddit or X or wherever. They'd reach out to their local IT users group or what have you to find out, hey, what's the fix to this? CrowdStrike then came out and said, hey, this is what happened. We're sorry. They handled it well, in my opinion. We're all human. We can all make mistakes. It could have happened to any of us. We need to be very careful in how we progress with things, especially things that will affect other people. But that being said, one thing I would have liked to have seen from CrowdStrike, even though I felt that they did the best they could with what they had available at the time, an early communication saying, hey, this is what's happening. We see it. We don't have a fix yet. We'll update when we do. And then they stick to that cadence. As far as the communication goes, there are some do's and don'ts. Communicate early and often. This is the place where I wish CrowdStrike had maybe done a little bit better. Only include confidential details for folks that are in a need to know role. By including confidential details, you could affect people's ability to trade. If it's material, non-public information that you're reading them in on, that could have some lasting impact on them. So make sure that you're only sharing what you need to share with who should have it. Have a way that folks can ask questions. When you communicate out to your customers and say, hey, we're having a deal, we're working through it, they're going to have questions. Set something up, either an email address they can email to get more information, or let them know, hey, you can call our support phone line. Your support people that are answering these emails and these phone calls, don't throw them to the wolves. Give them an FAQ. Give them a cheat sheet of notes about the incident, whatever you can, so that they can speak to your clients when they call in looking for more information. Again, make sure that you stick to that cadence, and then send the all clear as part of that cadence. Once everything is done and you're back to normal, regular operations have been reinstated, let everybody know, hey, this is our final communication on this. We are going to be going ahead and wrapping this up. And if there's anything outside of this, let us know. Fred, did you have a question or a comment?
Yeah, I wanted to ask you, considering a lot of people basically had outages because of CrowdStrike, what would your advice be to those folks to report downstream to, hey, we're down because upstream CrowdStrike? What would you say to those folks?
Right. So the important thing there is, you have to have a system up and running to be able to send those communications out, right? So obviously, you're not going to be sending an email from a blue screen box. But once you get a couple of systems up, I'm assuming that you're going to get your IT folks up and running. Have them send that email out. Make sure that they have been trained in public comms, how to communicate with the public, what to say, what not to say, how to do it. There's a lot of organizations that do this kind of training. I've been through that training at a previous employer. It was good stuff, really, really good thing. So make sure that they have a way to communicate it. And then even if they don't know, everything's blue screen, they got a couple of systems up, be honest. Our systems are down right now. We think we have a third-party issue. Your data, as far as we know at this point, is safe, and we're working to get this back online. Virginia, did you have a question or a comment?
I was going to say, Brad, this might be a good time, Mike, where like your marketing team who runs on Macs, they might be able to update the website for you too, to be able to say, hey, we're experiencing some other stuff, right? That might be an opportunity. Just saying.
Yeah, for anybody that isn't aware, Virginia is a Mac person, and she makes sure that we're aware of it. She didn't have to worry about the CrowdStrike issue. It was a Windows only thing, so Mac, Linux, we're good to go. But yeah, a lot of marketing teams do run Mac OS, so it's definitely something. And your comms or your marketing people probably have a good way to communicate with the public. So definitely bring them in. They might be able to kind of bail you out on this kind of thing.
I have to point out the irony here because having been the information security officer in a company that's got a marketing department, marketing is kind of the biggest offender, and for them to end up like safe from all of this is just ironic to me.
Every so often, it's nice to not be the one who's being the bad kid.
Yeah, one in a row.
Gosh. So some of the communication you don't want to make stuff up. Don't ever make a statement that you don't know to be true and factual. Don't speculate on things. I worked for an organization once where we had an individual that anything that happened, they swore it was the APT Grizzly Step. We'd been hit by Grizzly Step years earlier. They didn't get in. They were just knocking at the door. But because of that, they had this kind of recency bias of everything is going to be Grizzly Step from here on out. Don't make statements like that. Only things that you know to be true and that are okay to be shared. Don't blame people. It's very easy for us to throw mud at CrowdStrike and be like, haha, they screwed up. We've all screwed up. Microsoft released a patch. This is years back, kind of showing my age a little bit, but they released a patch that took all EMC SANs offline. I don't know how many of you remember that, but that was a bad day. We couldn't access any storage. So it can happen to anybody. It can happen to any company. Previous companies I've been at, we've released bad software as well. It sucks. It makes for a bad day for the people there. I have empathy for the folks that work at CrowdStrike. It happens. Could they have handled it better? Yes. But it's out there. So don't blame companies. Don't say, well, CrowdStrike screwed up and so we're down. Just say, hey, a third party is having an issue and we're dealing with that. Makes you look like a bigger person at the end of the day, kind of. And again, don't mention third parties by name unless that information is already public knowledge. If everybody knows that the CrowdStrike thing is going on and they know that you're running CrowdStrike, maybe your customers have that information available to them. Yeah, okay, then you can say, hey, it's the CrowdStrike thing. We're being affected. We're dealing with it. We're working with CrowdStrike to get back up and running. But if it's not public knowledge, don't make it public knowledge. Again, don't ever miss scheduled updates. It makes you look kind of unprepared. You want to make sure that you're always staying in good communication with folks. Be humbledent. Humbledent is a word that was actually coined by a company called Zendesk. They do support software, and humbledent is basically be humble but confident. You don't want to be a braggart or a know-it-all, but you don't want to put yourself forward as being somebody that doesn't know what you're talking about either. So be humble when you talk about it. Hey, we had an issue, but this is what we're doing, and we're confident in the steps that we're taking to address this issue. Don't make promises that the company can't keep. You don't want to say, oh, we had an outage. We'll give everybody a free 6 months of MDR monitoring, especially if you are somebody like myself. I'm the deputy CISO, but I don't have the authority to make that call. Make sure that you're not making promises that would not be approved. And then, you're in emergency mode, you're moving fast, and I'm really bad about typos. Any of you that have ever had an email exchange with me, or for the folks on the call that have had like Teams exchanges with me, I am the king of typos. I will typo anything. Make sure that your comms, though, do not have typos, and make sure that they're not overly technical. You want to make sure it's in plain English because you don't know who's going to be reading it. You don't know who your end audience is going to be. Yeah, you send it to the IT director at your customer's company, but he might forward it to their CEO who came from a finance background maybe, or their CFO. So make sure that it is normal and regular communications. As far as incidents go and incident response, a pro tip, invite your third parties to your tabletop exercises. A lot of times they'll say, no, we're not interested. Okay, fine, whatever. But at least make that invitation. A lot of them will take part. And it's really eye-opening for them to see how you're handling incidents and for you to see how they're handling it on their end. And you can really develop some strong synergies from that. You might want to, depending on what your business is, think about establishing a mutual aid or an MUA with other, if you're a hospital, have another hospital you can send patients to. If you're having a severe outage, you don't want ambulances and helicopters coming to your facility if you can't admit anybody. So identify a nearby hospital you can send these folks to in the meantime until you get back up and running, assuming they don't have the same issue. Same goes for municipalities, law enforcement agencies, fire, EMS, anything that has a very similar business nearby that you can cooperate with and send work to, basically. Excuse me. Identify replacement vendors. If you have a vendor that says, hey, we're going to be down for a month, you need to have something to fill in for that month. So have some backups identified that you can kind of lean on to help fulfill that gap that maybe your primary vendor is going to leave. You want to make sure that your third-party vendor issues are part of a scenario when you do your TTE. So in a TTE, like when we do TTEs for companies, we typically have 2 or 3 scenarios that we'll run you through. Maybe one's ransomware. Maybe one is somebody brought in a Wi-Fi access point from home and plugged it into the network or whatever. We will always try and use a third-party vendor as either an inject, which is kind of a monkey wrench that we throw into the incident to make you kind of really think and go through your incident response plan to address it. Or it could be a full-blown scenario on its own. The CrowdStrike thing would make a great tabletop exercise scenario for folks to make sure their disaster recovery and business continuity plans are all up to snuff. And then finally, ask for feedback from these third parties that you invite to your TTE. It's always good to get that outside view into your organization and how you're doing things. They might have some really good suggestions. Or they might reach out and say, hey, we really like what you're doing. We'd like to do that at our company. Can we steal some of your stuff? So finally, to kind of tie all the IR stuff together, I'm sorry, Virginia, do you have a question or comment?
Well, before we get into the incident response thing, we did have a great question come into our chat. And it said from Dan, with the CrowdStrike incident, some reports stated that the recovery time of companies like Delta were more adversely impacted due to outdated systems and or lack of resources. Do you think this incident highlights a lack of readiness by companies to recover from the incidents?
I will jump in and say when you have your entire fleet of systems are affected, I don't know that anybody really prepares for something that level other than a ransomware event. The only 2 things that's about it. So what I think caught people by surprise was, what does it mean to fix 5,000 remote laptops? That was, I think, a huge issue.
That's it. It's the resources issue. Dan's right. With a shortage of resources to go babysit all those computers, it's just going to take a long time. And I would say, too, it doesn't reflect so much on incident response as disaster recovery planning. This is a disaster, right? And this is where, nobody thought through this scenario, but that's kind of the point of a lot of things we're talking about is this stuff has happened more than once. It's going to happen again. There are countries seeing how this works, and disaster recovery planning should be up to and including, okay, well, an asteroid never hit. There hasn't been an earthquake. It's not a flood. It's not a windstorm. It's not nothing like that. But none of our computers work. Well, what are we going to do? And that could happen for a lot of reasons. I don't know if you've seen the Raytheon Champ missile that knows how to deliver a directed EMP pulse at a building and disable everything with a switch forever. But those things are starting to show up in warfare. So it's not a bad idea to just plan on, okay, what happens if none of our computers work? And that's really the scenario. That's it. Who cares how we got here? And I think it's that kind of planning that makes the difference.
Yeah, when people do incident response plans and disaster recovery plans and business continuity, and they do tabletop exercises, nobody ever thought about, hey, what happens if we get a bad patch on good software that takes the entire network out, like takes down all of our workstations, all of our endpoints? Nobody ever does that. It's always, when we do tabletops, it's always some isolated systems here and there, or maybe it's ransomware. But nobody really thought about what happens if the caller is coming from inside the house. What if it's a trusted vendor that we're using that brings our network down? How do we deal with that? You can bet dollars to donuts that a lot of people are going to have this as a scenario, though, moving forward, as they do, incident response and tabletop exercises, because a lot of folks got burned by it. I don't fault Delta, and I actually flew Delta on the Thursday right before CrowdStrike Friday. I was supposed to fly back on Friday. I dodged that bullet barely, but I don't fault Delta for it. Yeah, they have limited resources, but this is something that nobody really expected to happen. Now we're expecting it. Now we're looking for it. And that's the whole point of this webinar, is to kind of spread that awareness to folks. So with that, how do we kind of bring all this together? IR, make sure that you're using IR to get all the needed folks to the table. If Sarah and Dave are busy with some side project, but this incident takes precedence, pull them off that project, get them to the table for the incident. Your incidents are not always going to be internal. This is a perfect example of that. It could be an external vendor. Make sure that you have your third parties involved today. Reach out to them, review your contracts with them, make sure their notifications are in there. If they're not, upgrade or update that contract. Training and education of your people. Let them know, hey, if your machine suddenly blue screens, don't try rebooting it 8 times. Call IT right away, because there's something going on. It shouldn't have just randomly blue screened. Maybe it's a bad patch. Maybe it's just some weird hiccup, but we should at least be aware of that. Treat those critical vulns as an incident. A, it's good experience for your incident responders. B, it helps get the people on that issue, and helps to mobilize resources. I apologize, I do have a typo here. But make sure that folks are able to deal with that critical vuln before it becomes an actual breach. And then, use the output from these incidents to fine tune and tweak your incident response process. And then the last thing, I love saying this, it's my favorite thing to say. I say it in almost every meeting I have with folks, but security is not a journey. It's a journey. It's not a destination. We're never done with security. Security is never at 100% and we're done and we can go focus on this other thing. It's constantly going on. It's a game of leapfrog with the bad actors and with our third-party vendors. It doesn't necessarily have to be a bad actor that affects your security. So with that, Virginia, I'll hand it back to you. Or to Mike.
Thanks, Brad. Just before we kind of jump off of this into what Critical Insight does, there was another question that came into the chat, which was a little bit about what was the brand reputation impact of all of this stuff that happened with CrowdStrike. And Mike did give us some of the information here about in terms of what we saw with what happened to the stock price. And it has been changing. And if you haven't used an AI tool that I'm a fan of, it's called Perplexity, and it's perplexity.ai. It'll actually aggregate a whole bunch of different news sources for you, and you can kind of get that information for yourself and check out some of those news sources and see what they're saying about this. But also, I'll give you from a marketing perspective, what I saw at Black Hat this year is that they did a tremendous job in being able to be, like Brad said, show up with that humble credibility and being able to have some of that it's going to be okay, we're all in this together mindset. And I think it showed a lot of integrity around what they were doing. But as to what Mike mentioned early on in the beginning, this is some of the challenge that we see when all of our resources are pooled into one area. And so diversifying some of those different risks is helpful. And so when we talk about the diversifying some of those risks, it's about figuring out different ways that you can prepare, detect, and respond. And that's what Critical Insight does for you in terms of our full scope of cybersecurity as a service. And so whether or not you're looking to get ahead of the game, whether you're looking for some help with some MXDR services, or if you'd like some help from our team of professional services, we're able to be there for you. Normally, we would give you our survey at the end of our different presentations, but today SurveyMonkey has decided to fail us. So we're sorry we're not going to be able to send that out to you, but please, if you have any feedback, don't hesitate to drop me an email, virginia@criticalinsight.com. Be happy to share it with our speakers. And please come to our website where you can sign up for the daily IT security news blast, which is curated by Mike Hamilton and has been been for the last 15 years. Please sign up for our monthly security awareness trainings. We just had ours for September, and we'll have ours in October coming up soon. And we do have our regular online panels and webinars, which you can find on our events page. Please also check out our nonprofit partner, Pisces, at piscesinternational.org. And with that, I think I have our final comments and notes from the team. So, Mike, I'll start with you. Final thoughts?
Pay attention to this kind of thing. It's going to happen more frequently. That's all I can say. And it may be a mistake, and it may be intentional, and it may be intentional made to look like a mistake. But I do think that, you know, this needs to factor into our planning.
Thanks, Mike. Brad, what you got for me?
Yeah, you know, the bad actors are always watching, right? And so they see what happened with CrowdStrike and the effect that it had. They're going to continue to target, not that they targeted CrowdStrike this time, but they're going to target things like CrowdStrike moving forward because they see we hit one location and it's going to affect all these others. I worry about things like Epic and Cerner for our healthcare industry. If those get taken down, that's going to drop all the hospitals. They don't have to hack every hospital in the U.S. They just take out Epic and Cerner, and that's going to leave just a handful left. So just be on your guard. If you want to discuss any more with us, we're always happy to talk about this kind of stuff. So, and I think SurveyMonkey is down because they're running CrowdStrike. No, that's a joke.
I was going to make that joke.
Fred, take us on home.
Yeah, I'm just going to go down that same line that you need to identify things like everybody all uses the same OS, everybody's using the same EDR, understand what your vendor ecosystem, and if you're all on the same thing, and you all, for example, you're in a healthcare space and you all use the same PAC system and everybody's PAC system goes down, what do you do, right? So it's kind of a new twist we all have to worry about.
Thank you, everybody, for joining us today. Thank you, panelists, and we'll see you next time.